Okay. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see a lot of friendly faces back. It is 2022. It's our first session of the year. And it's actually, I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's actually our first year anniversary of the group. So it's perfect timing to have a special guest join us tonight. And we're so fortunate to have Wiley Blevins here to present. If you're new here tonight, my name is Amy Manning, and I am a reading specialist in the Waukee School District. And I started the group about a year ago, just wanting to learn more. And I knew that there were experts all over Iowa that I could learn from. And so we do meet monthly, the last Tuesday of every month virtually. And a lot of times we'll have special guests or we'll have people in the group, the experts in the group present. And then we do some discussion and support for half of our time. So it's kind of been changing a little bit along the way. There's a couple of ways that you can follow us. If you're on Facebook, you can follow the group Iowa Teacher Dyslexia Support Group. Or you can email me at dyslexia515@gmail.com if you want on the regular mailing list or off the regular mailing list. We do have a book giveaway tonight. I got a book donated from Benchmark Education, one of Wiley's books about phonics. It's amazing. If you would like to be in the running for the giveaway, in the chat, could you write like something like book and then your full name and your email address if you're comfortable with that, just so it's easy for me to go through the chat and find out who wants to be in the giveaway. I'll do one of those little randomizers and let everybody know who won, and then I'll mail it off. Again, we're just so fortunate to have Wiley present to us tonight. I'm ready to learn. And I know I was telling him my personal story and connection with him is just diving into his books and learning so much about the science of reading and phonics and how I can implement better practice with my students. And I just love his style of making this teacher friendly. And he just has a gift that speaks to me about it's not too, he knows all the research, he does that for us. And then how do we apply this in practice? So I'll quit babbling and let him introduce himself and tell us all the things.
Well, great. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining me. Amy invited me here this evening to share with you some of the most high impact phonics instructional routines that I use and the teachers that I work with use. I'll share some of the work I've done throughout the conversation and then at the very end. But since we have such a short period of time, I'm going to jump right in. I do tend to talk very fast. I live in New York now, so I talk like a New Yorker now, even though I'm originally from West Virginia, where we spoke very slowly. So I will send a copy of the PowerPoint that you can revisit. And there will be some documents that I'll talk about throughout the session. If there are any of those that you're interested in, just put it in the chat and I will send those off to Amy to get to you. So, and also anytime if you want to, if there are any pressing questions or anything that's unclear, Amy's going to be monitoring the chat and she will stop me and we can have that chat. So just let me know. When I first started talking about phonics many years ago, I was working with teachers and with publishers. My work was really focused on the 7 characteristics of strong phonics instruction to make sure these were in place. And many of these have routines associated with them that we'll talk about today, like blending, dictation, word awareness activities like word building, and also the importance of reading decodable text. But my work really changed about 12 years ago. When schools really started looking at what they were doing when the Common Core standards came out and realizing that they had phonics instructional materials in place and assessments and their teachers had been trained, but they weren't getting the results that they expected. It didn't make sense on paper. And I was finding that district after district, they were doing phonics things, but not getting the student outcomes. And so I really shifted to really digging into the instructional materials and the instructional practices, the way they were delivered, and also just watching lots and lots of teachers teach to see, did anything bubble up to the surface that were these obstacles that were standing in the way of student learning? And what I found is that there were 10 common reasons why phonics instruction sometimes fails. And my work in the past 12 years has been helping teachers and publishers unplug those obstacles so that we can maximize student learning. We have a very short window of opportunity for those foundational skills. And for me, it's all about efficiency. How do we get children from point A to point B as quickly as possible and get the largest number of students from point A to point B? So while there are many things that can work, I'm looking for the things that work the best and work for everyone. And so that's sort of where a lot of my thinking and a lot of my work centers around. So it's all about the fine tuning of what we do. And some of the things I'll share with you today are maybe things you're familiar with, but there may be some things in which I've fine-tuned them that may offer some support for the work you're doing with the students in your classroom. So if you aren't familiar with me, I'm the author of the International Literacy Association paper on phonics called Meeting the Challenges of Early Literacy Phonics Instruction. It's on their website, it's free, it's downloadable, it's very short, and it summarizes the 7 characteristics of strong phonics instruction, as well as the 10 reasons why phonics instruction sometimes fails. So even though we won't get through everything today, it's a great summary of some of the big ideas that are important to me when thinking about phonics instruction. And it's also a paper that you can share with the families of your students. So it's written in a way that is also accessible to them as well, and provide information that will help them understand what you're doing with the students in school. So I hope you take advantage of that. We're going to start with blending, which is the primary strategy we teach children to sound out words. It's a strategy you use all the time. There are 2 types or 2 ways in which we can model for students how to sound out words. The most common is called continuous or successive blending. And it's what you do all the time, where you'll write a word on the board or show the letter cards, and you'll run your finger under the letters as you string or sing together the sounds, like sat, sat. What's the word? Sat. So that's what's very, very common. There is another type of blending called final blending, and I use this at the beginning when I'm first introducing the concept of blending, because at the very beginning, I want to know right away if some of my students have some difficulties in certain areas. Are there students who aren't picking up those letter sounds? Are there students who have some serious phonemic awareness activities and they can't orally blend or orally string together sounds? This particular type of blending, done early on for a couple of weeks before I move on to continuous blending, which is easier and more efficient, really helps me check in on those important things. So in this type of blending, I would either show a letter card or write a letter on the board one at a time. We would slowly put together the words. So we're not going to blend it all the way through until we get all of the letters up there. So I put the letter S up and say sound. Children would go S. Put the letter A, I'd say sound, then go ah, put it together, sa. Put the next letter, sound, ts. All together now, sat. And so this tells me, do they know those letter sounds? Are they stringing together sounds? And also working memory. You know, when we go from sa to t and then put it together, can they hold on to those sounds in their working memory? So it gives me a lot of really valuable information. So this is another form of blending. Sometimes when I'm working with students in small groups, and especially students who are struggling a bit, I will drop back to final blending and build words slowly, piece by piece, just to check, are there specific sound spellings they're struggling with? Are there still some issues with phonemic awareness, orally blending together sounds? Are there working memory issues? All of that helps me better meet their needs. So I like having both of those in my repertoire of strategies, if you will. So when I first started doing this work about the issues in phonics, and I would watch teachers introduce a phonics skill, they would often write a few words on the board where they were model for children how to blend or sound out words. So you see here, the teacher has written a bunch of words with short O. Often it wasn't even this many words, and she would model how to blend them. And so part of my work is fine tuning what we're doing and taking advantage of every instructional moment. So when I looked at these words, there were a lot of missed opportunities that sort of popped into my head. One was the fact that these are just sort of some random words. I don't know if they're connected to what students are going to read. So are we front loading some of that work? They're not organized in any way from easier to more complex. When I do anything in phonics, great teaching, as you know, is teaching and assessing simultaneously. So when I think about my activities within each activity, the words and what have you I'm using, I always go from easier to more complex. So as the activity progresses, it gets slightly more difficult, and that helps me determine who has difficulties and where they have difficulties. So random organization of the practice items really doesn't help me get the information I need while I'm teaching to better meet the needs of the students. So that was one issue. Another issue is a lot of children struggle with fully sounding out words. They have a bad habit of just looking at a piece of the word, maybe the first letter or the first and last, and then guessing at it. I want to break those habits. So if I have words, which I call minimal contrast, that are very similar side by side, it forces them to attend to every letter and sound. The other thing is that I know the teacher is teaching short O here, but what about things that they previously taught? One of the big issues in phonics instruction is that we have what I call an exposure focused approach to it. We teach one skill 1 week, we go to the next week, we teach a new skill, we go to the next week and teach another skill. And if we don't extend the learning, if we don't teach it 1 week and just view that as our beginning of our exploration and continue working on that skill for many, many weeks after that. And for most children I work with, it's about 4 to 6 weeks of work after the introduction to get to mastery in both decoding, the reading of the words, and encoding the spelling. A lot of materials don't have that review and repetition built in. So what happens, we teach a skill well 1 week, we go to the next week, there isn't a lot of work on it. And for some children, that learning begins to slip away. It begins to do what I call decay. And decayed learning is a really big problem in phonics instruction if we don't have a robust review and repetition cycle. So every activity I do, and you'll see that throughout the activities today, I'm looking for ways to build in previous learning. The researchers call that the distributed practice, how we keep bringing back that learning throughout many weeks past the initial introduction to make sure students are holding on to it. So when I looked at this, lots of missed opportunities. I know some of you have heard me speak before and heard me talk about my blending lines, but this is sort of how I've restructured that so that I can address a lot of those issues. So the words in black are the words with the new skill, short O. And you'll notice, and we'll look at some of these lines, each line gets progressively more difficult. So if you look at that first line, and feel free to read them with me, not, hot, lot, dot, they only vary by the initial letter and sound. The next line, lot, log, dot, dog, now they're varying by the final. That's a little bit harder. The third line, hot, hat, hit, hut, now they're varying by the medial letter and sound. That's even harder for young learners. So as I go through these lines, and what I do is I model the first two. We'll have a conversation, what we notice about these words. It gives me a chance to help them make thinking public about how English words work. And that becomes even more important as we move up in the scope and sequence. And I'll show you an example in the next slide. But then children chorally blend the rest of the words. Generally, what I have them do is I tap and have them whisper blend, and then I tap again and have them chorally blend out loud so they can work through it. Then I tap again and they read it out loud. And there are children who make mistakes. That's when I'm going to provide that corrective feedback. So I have a lot of meaty words with the target skill, the new skill, and then the words in red are words from the previous weeks, previous 4 to 6 weeks. So I'm building in that review and repetition cycle. I always include some words they've seen in the stories they read, and I include some words they have not seen to see how easily they are transferring that skill, because you have to get to mastery before you can then transfer it to reading and writing, and that's our ultimate goal. So by modifying just the words that I use in my activity, I'm really hitting all of these instructional goals in a powerful way. And then because this lesson is whole group, I know there are children who, for example, are still struggling with some of those previous skills. So the review and repetition cycle really benefits them. And I have some students who can read these words already. So I don't want the lesson to be a waste of their time. So I always put in a challenge line. I'll take the skill and look at something related further in the scope and sequence. And here you see I'm adding a suffix, doubling the the final consonant, that's a more sophisticated look at that particular skill. So those children will benefit from that, and I can carry over that learning during small group and conversations I have with them and so on. So the work is also differentiated. Anything we teach whole group, we can't assume everyone's on the same page. We have to differentiate. I'm doing a lot of work right now because of the pandemic and students all over the place in terms of skill development, doing more work with how we differentiate whole group instruction to better meet students' needs, in addition to all the differentiation that's happening during small group. That's a whole different conversation. So those are the blending lines. You'll notice minimal contrast, the hat, hit, hot, hut, are a really important part of that. Minimal contrast for me are an essential part of phonics instruction because they help me teach children to fully analyze words, but I also use them when we move conceptually through the scope and sequence. We often forget about the conceptual leaps in phonics. So in kindergarten, for example, we'll start with teaching very simple short vowel CVC words, one letter, one sound, one letter, one sound. The next skill in many scope and sequences that I encounter is what's called final E or silent E, a word like, take, save, and so on. Now, conceptually, think about what that is. For months, children have learned one letter, one sound. The next skill in the scope and sequence, there are two letters that work together as a team, and they're not even beside each other, the word. That conceptually is an enormous leap. So we have to deal with that conceptual leap in a way that makes that new learning really easy and obvious for our young learners. So this is where minimal contrasts come in. I start with the known, a CVC word like hat that children know, and right underneath it, I'll write a word with a new skill, hate. So you see these two words, going from the known to the new, it highlights that new learning. I can have a conversation about what children see that's different, what they hear that's different, and really talk about the power of that AE team, even though they're not beside each other. The same thing with hop and hope. I continue that concept of two letters working together when we go to long vowels or complex vowels, going from set to seat. Talking about what they see that's different, what they hear that's different. Talk about the power of that EA team, mat to meet, the same sort of thing. When we're at the end of first grade, beginning of second grade, and we're slowly transitioning to multisyllabic words, which can be a real struggle for some children, I will start with a word, a simple word they know, like can or rat, and tack on an additional piece. It could be a prefix, it could be a suffix, it could be a syllable type, like what we have here, the DLE. So going from can to candle is a much easier transition to bigger words. And all the child really needs to focus on is that new learning. So it minimizes the complexity of that task. And then as we keep going up to the grades, going from happy to unhappy, having that conversation about that prefix, what it means, how it's its own syllable, or going from happy to happily. A lot of children see happily and don't know it comes from happy. So doing them side by side, talking about the spelling change and why we do that and what other words. It just sets up all of these rich conversations that need to happen during phonics instruction that really help students understand how English works. For me, great phonics is active, it's engaging, and it's thought-provoking. There's a lot of talking and thinking about words and how they work, which really has payoff when children, especially when they're spelling words. Okay, let's keep going. So another thing that I do with these minimal contrasts is occasionally in the instruction, I will add some minimal contrast sentences, because for me, that really is the test of how well students can quickly analyze words that are very similar. So if you look at sentence number 1, and if you want to read that with me, I hate that hat. If a child can read it quickly, they are noticing very subtle differences between hat and hate, very subtle differences between that and hat. That is our goal, for them to be able to do that quite efficiently. He got a goat from his farm. As they're going through, noticing quickly the power of that OA versus the O by itself. Really important checks for me throughout that instruction. So these kinds of things can have big impact. Here's an example. I don't know, some of you have heard me speak before, but here's an example of what blending lines look in kindergarten. Start with some letters, children say the sounds, some very simple words like it to sit, in to pin, and then less controlled, review and repetition, and then I've added that challenge with the plural. When they get to first grade, they get more complex. Here again, we're doing long A, spelled A-I-A-Y, but I start with the known, ran, and go to rain. And then we have that conversation and do all that work I was talking about. And they get progressively harder as you go. You have your review and repetition. You have your challenge words for your advanced learners. Things really have to change when we get to second and third grade because the reading demands change. This graphic really highlights why I do some of the things that I do. It looks at the amount of multisyllabic words children typically encounter. In first grade, there aren't very many, but when you get to second grade, it goes from almost no multisyllabic words to it's like 18 to 20,000. It's just this enormous leap. And in second grade, I think second grade's a really hard year. Children have to get at fluency with all of those basic skills in one syllable words, but at the same time, they're encountering all these stories with tons and tons of multisyllabic words. And we often don't help them read those longer, more complex words early enough. If I look at a lot of programs, multisyllabic words aren't dealt with until later in the second half of the year, but they're reading those words from the beginning. So I begin in my blending lines, what I call transition to longer words work. So I work on those skills, the one syllable level that I need to make sure my second graders have mastered. And then I take a simple word like hard and go to harder or hardest. Large, go to larger or largest, farm to farmer, start to start. I'm just adding on suffixes. And so they know a part of the word isn't as overwhelming. And I can also have conversations about meaning, about spelling changes and things like that. So these blending lines really serve a lot of purpose and a lot of function for me in my instruction. One of the documents that I'm going to send you if you want, I have a document where I've taken all of the instructional routines I'm going to talk about today and some more. And I've written up a couple what I call teacher alerts, some important things to consider with each routine that take it from okay to more impactful. For example, I want the teachers I work with to spend more time decoding words in connected text rather than in isolation. So the word lines that I showed you is just a short, it takes about 5 minutes. We only spend about 5 minutes. We get through as much as we can in the 5 minutes, and then we're reading a story and we're really digging in and we're writing about that story. So we're picking up a book and we're picking up a pencil, which is where the learning really sticks. If I'm making up my own words for the blending lines, I'm going to look at those high utility words with those skills, the most common words children are going to encounter in reading or use in writing, because that is going to have more impact on their progress is if I'm very careful about the words I choose. And when I'm modeling, I'm only going to model a couple words and let the children do the heavy lifting so that they're working through it and they're practicing those skills and I'm there to provide corrective feedback. That can really change that routine from okay to really impactful. And then I also have principal look-fors. I don't know if there are any administrators on here, but I work with quite a few principals who haven't taught in the primary grades or don't necessarily have a background in phonics. And I want them to be able to give really targeted, purposeful, impactful feedback when they're watching teachers use these routines that will also make that routine better and more purposeful. So I can send you that list if anyone is interested. The next routine is centered around dictation, or what I call guided spelling. I'm spending a lot of time talking about spelling and coding because there seems to be a real imbalance in our phonics instruction. We're supposed to be getting students to master decoding the words, reading them, and encoding or spelling them. But we often get children who can read the words okay, but can't spell to save their lives. And there are all these amazing activities that we do with spelling. And is also another reason why we need to extend that learning, because the spelling lags behind the reading. It takes longer to get that into mastery and transfer than it does the decoding for many, many children. So we need a bit more focus, I think. Spelling, and these are some of the resources I use that I particularly love, and you probably have resources like that. I'll show you an example in just a second. But spelling starts with phonemic awareness. We talked about oral blending, stringing together those sounds orally. You have to be able to do that to read a word, because when you read a word, you're seeing all the letters, thinking about the sounds, and stringing them together. Likewise, when we write a word, when you first learned to spell words, you didn't know how to spell them. So you had to think about the individual sounds and then attach a letter or spelling to each of those sounds. So that's oral segmentation. So oral blending and oral segmentation are what I call the power skills in phonemic awareness, because they're so directly related to early reading and writing development. I spend a lot of time with kindergartners and first graders working on those skills. So I start very simply, just making sure children are aware of what a sound is and how to hear sounds. So let's say if it was the word sat, I would have children stretch those sounds. So I use what I call a magic rubber band. If you have your magic rubber bands with you, you can do this with me, but I'll say a word and we'll just stretch the sound. Sat. We'll do that a few times. Children love to do that. And then I hand them their sound boxes, or Alkonen boxes. That's the Russian researcher who invented them. Just a series of boxes and these counters. And the children are going to drag a counter onto each box as they go from sound to sound. So we were stretching the sounds in sat. Now we're going to do it again, but we're going to move a counter onto each box. So we're going to go sat. That's oral segmentation. We know the word has 3 sounds. Unfortunately, when I visit classrooms, that's often where that activity stops. So we're not getting the impact that we need to. What we need to do after we've broken apart, put it together with letters. So make those sound spelling connections really obvious for students and help them deeply understand the process of spelling words. So I'll ask children, what's that first sound in sat? What letter do we write for the sound? And we'll replace the counter with the letter S. And we'll work through the word that same way, taking it apart, putting together. Really powerful, hugely impactful routine for our youngest learners. That leads to the more formal kinds of dictation or guided spelling that I do. So I get students ready to do the dictation, which I tend to do about twice a week in the instructional cycle, and I begin it right away in kindergarten. So we're doing those activities during our phonemic awareness time, during our spelling time. I might, at the beginning of the year, just say some sounds and have children write the letters. We progress a little bit more and I'll add a couple simple words, and then we'll progress a little more in the year and I'll add a simple sentence. And it's a conversation, it's not a test. So I don't grade it. We talk about it. If children need help, breaking apart the word by sounds, if they need to use the sound boxes, and I know some teachers tap sounds or they move their hands, whatever the children need to do, that's what you do. If they need to look at the alphabet cards or the alphabet chart for some support, they do that. We talk it through. And they write their letters and words. I put the answers and they self-correct. Self-correction is a really important part of dictation. And it enables us to have these rich conversations about how words work. By the time we get to first grade, it changes. I'll choose, like here we're doing short U, I'll choose maybe 2 or 3 words with a new skill and a simple sentence. But by this point, they've learned so many sound spellings. I know I need to continue working on previously taught skills because I know some children haven't mastered that. So I will add some additional words from previously taught skills to the dictation. I generally choose these by looking at student writing. So I look at later, the most recent pieces of writing, and if there are skills that I've taught that I don't see them consistently and accurately applying, those make really great types of words for dictation. So you can continually modify it based on the work your students need as a whole group. And if you're working with students in small group, specifically what they need. A second grade on up, you can continue doing dictation type activities that are these guided conversations. You might start the beginning of the year with a simple word from first grade like rain, and go to train, and then go to training, and then go to retraining, and slowly build these words. And they have to think about the pieces they're adding and how they change meaning or change spelling. You can do dictation just on spelling changes, happy to happily, happy to happiness, and so on. Do some dictation with longer multisyllabic words, just doing it piece by piece, re, expected. And then they start seeing these common pieces of words like RE and ED that they're going to see in a lot of words and start recognizing them as chunks. So there's a lot of value in continuing those kinds of activities past first grade, of course. These are some examples of the kinds of dictation activities I do regularly. This is a kindergarten and this is a first grade. I just wanted to point them out because here again, I organize them from easier to more complex. more supportive to less supportive. So as we go through the activity, I can see where children and which children might start to fall apart. So that helps me know what they need. So here in kindergarten, I'll say a word like apple and they just segment off that first sound and write the letter A. We get to the next chunk and we're going to stretch those sounds and man and move the counters and then replace the counters with the letters. So we're walking through, and then I'll give them a word without that support and see if they can carry that over, if they can still do it. In first grade, we'll do a few words with the sound boxes like change, ain, they write that AI in the middle. Then we get to Greg, A, and they write the AY at the end and so on. And I might ask them a question like, what do you notice about the difference between AI and AY, where it appears in a word? And they'll notice because of chain and train, AI is always in the middle. It's never at the end, but AY is. That gives them some information about how English words work, and they can make some decisions when they're spelling words about which spelling they're going to choose. So here again, these are set up to have some really rich and powerful conversations. The other tools I use, because spelling has become such a big issue and teachers are not taking the long range view, a lot of the teachers that I work with or a lot of programs, I want to give them tools to help them do that. So one of the tools that I've created for every grade is just a skill checklist of the skills we're going to teach in phonics for that grade. It goes in the student's writer's notebook. When we introduce a skill, the children circle it, which means they're going to be held accountable. And periodically, the teacher will look at some of their more recent pieces of writing. If they see evidence of consistent and accurate use of the skill, the teacher will write a few sample words to celebrate that and give them a check that they're moving toward mastery. So what this does is, at a glance, if I'm looking at a child's writer's notebook, I can look at all the skills that are circled. I can look at the ones that haven't achieved mastery. So while I'm reading, I can pay attention to see if there's evidence of those skills. It helps you individualize spelling. It helps you form small groups for spelling if you need to do so to provide that more targeted work. And because you're looking at skills over a long period of time, it's a more accurate a look at students' actual progress. The other thing is, instead of spelling lists, I don't give spelling lists. I know they're super popular, that list of 10 words, and then you do 10 the next week and what have you. It tends not to be the best look at spelling growth. So what I do is I create cumulative sentences. So what I will do, this is first grade, I only have time for the students to spell the 4 sentences. You can base the number of sentences based on the time you have, but we're working on ow, spelled O-U and O-W. So you're gonna see that in these sentences, I have at least an ow word in all of them. And then I looked at the previous skills from the previous 4 to 6 weeks and folded in some words with those skills. So they're carefully constructed sentences that have words with skills that we've previously worked on, so I can look over time how they're doing with those skills. You can do this with any grade. I do the same thing with 3rd grade. We're doing AR-OR, so you see or, and you see barked and park and tractor and farmer, lots of AR-OR words. You get to the next week and we're doing R-controlled ER-IR-UR, and you'll see turtle and water and birthday, but you also see words like start from that previous week, just hanging on to those. So you can carefully construct those cumulative sentences and track skills over time to see when mastery occurs, or to see if they did okay that first week, but then all of a sudden they start struggling. That means the learning is decaying. I'm going to add more words into my dictation work to make sure I'm holding on to that learning, that practice, to make sure no kids go to the next grade with those learning deficits or those learning holes. I need lots of tools like this. I'm going to show you an assessment tool near the end. I need lots of very simple tools to hang on to and to see in real time what my students can and cannot do, so I can make those kinds of course corrections for them in real time. So some of the fun activities I do that sort of combine both spelling and decoding, I'll make these spinners. The first and last spinner, it'll be consonants or blends or digraphs, depending on where my students are. And the middle spinner will have short vowels, long vowel spellings, whatever we're working on. The children spin the spinners and then they blend the words. And if it's a real word, we record it. If it's not, we don't. This also helps. This is also a really fun way to practice blending and spelling and introduce the concept of real versus nonsense words, because children have to understand nonsense words because the phonics assessments uses nonsense, and I don't want to waste time doing lots of work with nonsense, but an activity that's geared at decoding and encoding work, but also we have that conversation can be really powerful. Same thing, I can put some spelling patterns that we're working on and put some letters on letter cubes. Children roll the letter cubes or spin them, whatever, and they see how many words they can form. These are also great activities to do with partners or to do in small groups, and they're having conversations about what the correct spelling is and if it's a real word and all of that. This just adds some engagement to some of those activities, and it's nice to bring that into the classroom from time to time. And here again, there are these teacher alerts and look fors that you'll get copies of at the end. I'll send you. Word building. I know you probably do a lot of word building. Word building is probably my favorite activity. In word building, it gives students a small set of letter cards, and they have to build a series of words. So there are different ways you can do it. You can do word building with a blending focus, and maybe you do this at the beginning of the week when you're introducing the skill. You give students a small set of letter cards, and you have them form the word sad. So they put their letter cards in order, and you say, replace the letter S with M. What's the word? And the task really is just sounding out. And that's just giving them some flexibility, some additional practice sounding out lots of words. But where you eventually want to be in that instructional cycle, and what's really powerful is word building with a word awareness focus, where you start having them build a word like sad, and you say, I want you to go from sad to mad. And they have to make the decision. So they have to think about very deeply about what sounds are different, what position of the word, what letter or spelling is attached to that sound. And then they have to form the word correctly, and they have to check it. So they have to read it. So it involves some very sophisticated phonemic awareness when they're manipulating those sounds orally, and then they're forming the word, so it's encoding or spelling work, and then they're reading to confirm they got it correct. That's decoding. So it combines all of these things in one really powerful activity, and it's really, really fun. So I'll give students a small set of letter cards and build a series of related words like sad to mad, mad to math, math to tap, and so on. And then I might repeat it a few days later and add some words with previous class skills. Oh, is there a question? Oh, I guess not. I'll add some words with previously taught skills. And so that's part of that review and repetition cycle. Now, this is what I would do in first grade. In kindergarten, I would start with them just replacing the initial letter sound. When they got good at that, would replace the initial and final. When they got good at that, would replace the initial, medial, final. What you see here is more like first grade. By the time we get to second grade, we'll do a little bit of that, but we're also going to start building in syllables, larger chunks. And you can continue this all the way up, third, fourth, fifth grade. There are these 322 syllables in English, the most common syllables that make about 5,000 words. And these are common word parts like TION and UN and RE and TIVE, big chunks that children should recognize as chunks when they see big words. So I can give students just a small set of syllable cards, and we can start by having them build prescriptive and go to prescription, and then go to prevention, and then go to convention or invention. We just built a few words, but they had lots of practice noticing like TION, TIV, PRE, these high utility syllables. So this word building can continue far past first, kindergarten and first grade, all the way up through, the intermediate grades, and get a lot of mileage out of that. One of the alternatives to this that I love doing, and that children really love, is called living words. So occasionally you could mix up what you're doing in your classroom. This is me doing this activity with a group of kindergartners. I have a few children come to the front of the classroom. I have this large set of letter cards that they have. All the children are sitting at their desks. I don't believe in couch potato learning, so they're not just watching, they're doing. They have their letter cards. So I say, I want to make the word sat. So if the children in front of the room, they have those letters, they come together to form the word, and the children at their seats are also making the word and checking to see if we're correct. So all thumbs up if we're correct. You see here, I'm running my hand over their heads as we sound out the word sat. What's the word? Sat. Then I ask children, I want to go from sat to mat. What do I need to change? Where? Why? We have these really robust conversations about sounds and letters. And so there's a lot of thinking going on, a lot of doing, a lot of interaction. So it's just a fun alternative. There are other ways to do word building, which I know you're familiar with. Tim Rosinski's word ladders are one of my favorites, and the kids I work with really love them. They combine the typical word building with vocabulary. So the way this works, so these are very easy to create. If you follow Tim Rosinski, RASINSKI on Twitter, he always posts free word ladders that you can see for as examples. And his website has a lot of resources, but he'll start by having children write a word like sat, and then he gives them a clue. I want you to change one letter in sat to name something you wear on your head. What word are we going to write? Everyone says hat, so they write the word hat. The teacher writes on the board, so they check their spelling. And then it'll say, I want you to change one letter in hat to name something you shouldn't do to your little sister. And they all go, oh, hit. So then they write the word hit. So you can change a letter, you can take away a letter, you can add a letter early on. And then as children move up the grades, you're going to start replacing bigger pieces of the word. So you can do this, you know, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, they get more and more sophisticated. He has lots of great examples. But here again, another way to get students really thinking about words, to really focus on both the decoding and the encoding aspect. And here again, there are some teacher alerts and look for that I'll share with you. High frequency words. There are, as you know, only 13 words that account for about a fourth of the words that students will encounter, and only about 100 that account for about half of the words they'll encounter. So the statistics vary a bit, but the point is there are a small set of words that are hugely impactful. And some of those words are irregular. So they don't follow those common sound spelling patterns that we typically teach, like the word the most common word in English. Words like they, was, live, come, some, who, what, you know, there are quite a few. And so we have to really focus our attention not only on those, but also the decodable high frequency words, and make sure that students learn those really well, efficiently early on. So when I first started school, we didn't learn to read until first grade. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Wershaw, and she taught us high frequency words in the traditional way. She would write a context sentence on the board, like I see a cat. She'd underline the word that was our target word. She would read it aloud, and we would repeat. And that's sort of what we did. What we've learned from brain research, and this is where the science of reading comes in, all these other sciences like cognitive researchers, neurobiologists and stuff who are doing lots of different kinds of research and looking at some of what we're doing and really confirming some of the things or asking us to look differently at some of the things. Learning words is one of those areas where we know that in order to know a word, there are actually 3 parts of our brain that need to be activated, and the connection is really tight. So there's the part where the sounds are stored. So when Mrs. Wershaw said the word see, that part of my brain was activated. So those pictures, those brain pictures I showed you, that part would have lit up if I was paying attention, of course. And then the part where the meaning is stored. So that context sentence, I see a cat, took care of that part. But there was one part that wasn't activated that's so important to learning words, and that's the part where the letters are stored. You know, people say our brain works like a pattern detector. In order for us to automatically access words, a process that is called orthographic mapping, we have to attend to the individual sounds and the individual letters or spellings of a word, even if the word is irregular. So we have to look at what we're doing instructionally to highlight that. And there's a lot of attention on this now, and I'm sure you've heard like some of the work that Louisa Moses is doing and others around this area. The routine I use is called read, spell, write, extend. I introduce the word in context, just like Mrs. Wershaw. So if the word is said, I'll provide a very simple sentence I know my students can read, like I see a cat, said Pam. We read the word, and then we do what I refer to as the orthographic mapping part. We think about the individual sounds and the letters. So I will ask children, what sounds do you hear in said? Let's say those sounds. Said. We have those 3 sounds. Then I highlight very quickly the parts of the word they already know. So I ask, what's that first sound in said? What letter do we write for it? S, do you see that? Yeah, what's that last sound? We go through that. And then I highlight, draw attention to the part that is irregular or the part that is unknown. Sometimes there are high frequency words we use in stories that aren't irregular, but they have spellings we haven't taught children yet. And so we want to draw attention. But that for those irregular words, we want to draw attention. I'll draw attention to that middle sound, which we normally spell with an E, but we don't in this word. That's the part that children have to remember. Louisa calls it heart word. She'll put a little heart above the word, color code it, whatever you do is fine, but it's that whole orthographic mapping, attending to the individual sounds and the individual spellings. So then we spell it out loud, S-A-I-D. We write it as we say the letters, S-A-I-D, read, spell, write. Meaning, letters, and sounds activated from the initial introduction. And then we can keep reinforcing that. The extension is really just applying it in sentences. I might give a sentence frame or a sentence starter. Children will share their sentences orally, then they'll write them. Maybe I will have them talk a little bit about that sentence and we'll do some sentence building. You know, there are other kinds of things we can do with them based on what we are focusing on in our writing and other parts of our literacy block. A couple things to point out about these high frequency words. Some of the ones that are irregular actually aren't as irregular as we think, because there are other words that behave the same way. Like the word there, there's a word that rhymes with there and ends in E-R-E, and that is where. There are other words like that, to, do, and who, come and some, give and live, could, should, and would. So there are these so-called irregular words, but they have families. And the unfortunate thing is that in most curriculum, these words aren't taught as a family. For example, if you look at maybe the curriculum you're using, my guess would be is that could is taught 1 week, should could be a month later, would could be 3 months later. You know, we're not really taking advantage of how our brain works and noticing those common patterns. So whatever curriculum the teachers I'm working with use, if the word could is introduced, I fold in should and would. And we look at it as a family. We talk about that pattern and so on. So we take advantage of that learning and those rich conversations. The other thing that I think is really important to understand in any curriculum that's being used is there are certain words that are problem words for many children. Words that are reversals like on and no and was and saw. Words like of, for, and from, which look very similarly, but are really hard to attach to meaning, and many children, especially English learners that I've worked with, struggle with these. Words that begin with TH and WH, there and where, then and when, that and what. If you're reading and you say that instead of what, it can really affect your understanding. And then there are those few words that just don't sound very much like how they look. The reason I'm pointing these out is these words that we know are more problematic. In almost every curriculum I've ever reviewed, they only get 1 week of instruction, just like all the easy words. And so that's a problem. We know these words need more attention. So look at your high frequency word scope and sequence. If you're teaching any of these words, incorporate them in multiple hits throughout the year. So you're not just working on it once, you're working on it 3 or 4 times throughout the year. Make sure these words are on your high frequency word assessments. These are the words students are most likely to struggle with. Make sure that you're assessing so that you know whether or not they really mastered those words before they go on to the new school or the next school year. We really need some ways to stay on top of these words. The other thing about high frequency words that I think is important to consider when you're thinking about the words you use instructionally, I have a list in one of my books of the top 248 high frequency words. I took the Dolch 220, which is a popular list, the Fry 100, which is a popular list, and the American Heritage top 150 words in English. Put them together, got rid of the repeats, and it came out to 248. I wish it had been 250 because that's such an easy number to remember. But the way I use this list, if you go through this, you'll see there are these little asterisks. Those are the words that are irregular. They never become fully decodable based on the phonics scope and sequence in kindergarten, first and second grade in most programs. So I need to know that. But then if I'm teaching short A, for example, and I'm thinking about what words I want to use instruction, I go through this list and pull out those short A words and make sure those are in my blending line, and those are in sentences I'm creating, and those are used in dictation, because if I can get students to master very quickly the most common words in English that they're going to see and use, my instruction is going to have more impact. So I'm very, very careful. If you have students who are struggling and you want words to use during small group, it's a great resource to choose those words with the highest impact. Flashcards, I don't know if you like flashcards or if you use flashcards. I always enjoy flashcards, but they don't get as much impact as I would like them to. So I modified how I use them. So when I do that read, spell, write routine with the whole group, and I have students who struggle, I will pull them for small group work and we'll repeat that routine. And when we get to the right part, I will have students write the word on one side of an index card, like see, down, and now, and then we'll turn the card over and we will co-construct a very simple sentence. So they're reading the words in isolation, they flip them over and they're reading them in context. You know, children need lots and lots of opportunities to read these words in context to really have a firm grasp of not only reading them, but how they're used in English. So quite a few years ago, these are some of the cards I created with some children here in New York City. So for C, they wrote, can you see? 3 very simple words they could read on their own. For down, they wrote sit down, something they heard a lot. Now, not now, something they heard a lot. When we got to the words from and of, which are very difficult, it was important for us to construct a sentence that helped them understand how these words were used in English. So I was working with a lot of children this year from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And so they wrote, I am from, and then every child drew a flag of the country they were originally from. And then for of, New York City, we're famous for our slices of pizza. People grab a slice and walk down the street. They didn't come with a sentence, but they came with a phrase, which is completely fine, a slice of pizza. Obviously, I helped them with slice, but they remembered it because there was a picture of a slice of pizza that they drew. But they started getting a deeper understanding of the difference between from and of. So this can also really help those children who need additional support. The other thing that's been really helpful for me in high frequency words, which is a really basic thing, and probably you all do this already, but in the writer's notebooks, I reserve a section in the back just for high frequency words. So if it's first grade, I'm teaching 4 words this week, I write them on the board. And one of the things students do during independent work time is they write 1 sentence for each of their words. And then the next week they write 1 sentence and so on. So that's pretty basic. But what I do to take it to the next level is 1 day each week. Maybe we write our sentences on Monday. And then on Wednesday, one of the things they do during independent work time is find a partner and read their sentences from the beginning of the year. So the sentences they wrote week 1, by the time we get to week 30, they've read those sentences 30 times. Now, if you think about, most children need about 4 to 12 exposures in context. You know, other children need many, many more. I'm ensuring multiple opportunities to see those words in context. The other thing that's really fascinating, especially with kindergartners and first graders, is as the children go through the year and they're revisiting these sentences week after week after week, it becomes a reflection of their growing writing abilities. And you see them do things like correct spelling, correct punctuation, correct capitalization. And it's really interesting to see them take ownership of their growing skills. And you have a snapshot of how those have changed over time. So that's been a really fun sort of side effect. And then there are some of those teacher alerts and principal alerts. I'm looking at the times. I want to make sure I get through everything. We just have a couple little things left. So please bear with me if you can. The other thing is reading decodable text. I do whole sessions on decodable text. I wrote a whole book about decodable text. Decodable texts are just, they're this really critical practice tool for children when they're learning these skills, because there's so much concentrated work on using those skills to sound out words and to get to mastery efficiently. But I find that they're not used very effectively in classrooms. They tend to be just sort of, we race through them and we go on, and we're not getting the instructional impact that we can. So I created a decodable text lesson planner template that I use. I'm going to go through just some of the pieces that might not be familiar to you, how I try to elevate the work with these. And I will send you a copy of this in a sample lesson if you're interested. But you see this book here, My Big Trip, lots of words with long A, spelled A-I and A-Y. A lot of teachers would just have the children sort of go through it, read it, and move on. Maybe they would reread it the next day. And yes, that is an important part of it. You know, reading these to practice those skills, because decodable books are a practice tool, modeling decoding, you know, reinforcing those skills, all of that is critical. But I think there are other things that we could do. So a lot of the children I work with really struggle with vocabulary. And decodable texts aren't the kind of text we use or think about building vocabulary. We think about the read alouds and all the rich conversations we have, and that is absolutely true. But I want to fine tune everything I'm doing and see how can I take it to the next level. So I've been thinking a lot about these other areas. So I thought, well, if I'm reading a little decodable book called Lots of Frogs, it's short O, and the text is I see a frog, the frog can hop, hop, frog, hop. Not a lot of vocabulary. But during my read aloud that day, if I read a nonfiction book about frogs, like Red-Eyed Tree Frog, we talked about frog habitats, I could bring in some of that language and some of that conversation when we're reading I see a frog, frog can hop, because there are all these great photos of frogs in their habitats. So that's, I can make those connections. It's not easy to make them all the time, but when you can be super, super powerful. But there is something I can do, regardless of what I have in my classroom. I don't need any resources, is I can preview the book. And here's a book, another book about frogs. There's lots of short vowels, not a lot of sophisticated vocabulary. And I can choose one tier 2 academic word. It's not going to be in the book, but I can use to talk about the book and elevate our conversation. So in this book, when I introduce it, we read the title, we talk about the cover illustration. I ask children where the frogs are. They don't know, I will say it's a pond, because that word is in the story. And then I introduce that tier 2 academic word, and I say, the place where animals live is called their habitat. What's a habitat? And they'll tell me the place where animals live. And I say, well, as we read, I want you to look for clues in the words and the pictures that tell us more about a frog's habitat. So as we read and we're working on sounding out, we stop periodically and I ask them questions. What have we learned so far about a frog's habitat? Turn to your partner. Use the word habitat when you're talking. It just transforms the conversation and the level of talk that's happening. And all I've really done is include one academic word. But if you do this every day with every little book you read, and it's a very easy thing to do, it can really transform it. So that book, My Big Trip, is about a little girl going to Spain in the month of May. She's riding a train. What she's doing is she is exploring this new country. So I thought, well, explore is a really useful tier 2 academic word. So I introduced it to my students using the define, example, ask routine that Isabel Beck created, because it's a very simple routine and really fast if you want to quickly introduce a word before the reading. So I define it using kid-friendly language. Explore means to find out more about something. What does explore mean, class? And they'll repeat the definition. I give them an example that's relevant to their experiences. So maybe something we're doing in the classroom, maybe there's something we're exploring or so on. So I connect it to their lives. And then I ask them a question where they have to turn to a partner and answer and use the word explore. So I'll ask them, what new place would you like to explore or find out more about? So even when I ask the question, I define the word just to give them another hit of the meaning and make sure every child understands that question. So those parentheticals can really work for you. And then as we read, we stop and I ask them, what's she exploring now? Oh, she's at the King's Palace. What would you like to explore at a King's Palace? Talk to your partner. You can see how that changes. So that's one thing that you can do to elevate it. The other thing is, we're modeling blending and we're asking questions as we read, but to sort of sum it all up, I want to ask a series of questions that really get students to go back into the story and think about it deeply and also develop some early reading behaviors. Here again, these are really basic stories. They're not Shakespeare, but there's so much more we could do with them. This is a simple little 4-page story about a little girl on a train in Spain. But all the stories, and I've written these for dozens and dozens and dozens of decodables. It's very simple to do. I come up with 5 questions that go from easier to more complex, and each question has a specific instructional goal. So I'll ask a question. I'll have children turn to a partner to answer it. So they're all using language and processing their thinking. And then I will call on volunteers to answer. So there's a lot going on with these questions. So the first one, I always have them focus on a word with a new phonics skill. So in this book, I asked, where did the girl go on a trip? Point to the country's name in the story. This forces the children to go back into the story and reread. We're getting more reading during this activity until they find a word with a new skill. Can they identify a word with a new skill? The second question, I prompt students to find a detail and support with text evidence. So a very basic question, but they have to provide the evidence in the text for their answer, which is a really important early reading behavior. So the second question is, what did the girl do in Spain? Find the sentences that tell this. So think about what they have to do. They have to go in the story till they find the sentence or sentences that answer it. They have to turn to their partner and read those sentences, have a conversation with the partner, whether or not that really answers the question. And then a few will share out and share their sentences. A lot of talk, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking. Third and fourth questions are higher level questions. And it doesn't seem like you could ask many higher level questions, but often there are really interesting opportunities to do that. So in this particular story, what problems did the girl have on her trip? Find them. Where might the girl go on her next trip? Why do you think this? That's higher level. There's a little inference at the end. Children can make that inference. And then I always connect it to student lives. What kind of big trip would you like to go on? If I had introduced that word explore before the book, I would have included that word in one of my questions. So I might have asked, what kind of big trip would you like to go on? What would you like to explore there? Here again, completely transforms the kind of work that's being done. Ooh, I just have a couple of minutes. I hope you guys can hang on. The last thing that I do, which is the biggest missed opportunity in phonics instruction, is we write about every decodable that we read. If we are reading a book with lots of long A words spelled A-I-A-Y, and I ask children to write about it, what kinds of words do they have to use? Lots of words with long A spelled A-I and A-Y. I'm forcing them to apply, to transfer that skill to writing, which is really difficult when you're first learning a skill, but they have the book there as a scaffold. So it makes a perfectly constructed kind of activity. And it also reinforces and gives more opportunities for the encoding side of that phonics work. So if it's a retelling, or if it's a fiction, maybe we write a retelling or a story extension. If it's informational, maybe we draw a picture and write the most interesting fact we learned, or make a list of the facts we learned. If you have students who need support, you can provide sentence frames or sentence starters to get that writing started, but encourage them to go beyond. But lots of meaty work. Some teachers tell me, well, I don't have a lot of time during my phonics lesson to do writing, and that's okay. You can get it started, and it makes a really great independent work activity because they have the book there. They know what they're writing or retelling, writing sentences they learned or what have you. They have the support there with the book, and they can complete it as well during independent time if you're short on time. This is an example of a lesson plan I will send you that goes through those steps very simply to give you an example. So this is a book called Let's Grow Them, short E. I listed the short E words like red, 10, wet. I decided to pre-teach the tier 2 academic word patient because the children have to be patient. They're growing seeds. So I used Isabel Beck's defining example, aspartame. Then when it came to the questions, the first question, how many seeds does Ben have? 10. That's a word in the story with the skill we're working on. The detail question, what did Ben and Jess do to help the seeds grow? Find the sentences that support. So they're rereading and providing text evidence. One of the higher level questions, do you think Ben and Jess were patient? Why or why not? There's certainly proof in the story that will help children answer that question, and I use that tier 2 academic word. I had the children write the list of steps to grow the tomatoes that were in the story. And on subsequent days, we reread it with a partner, and then we reread it on another day and found words with particular spelling patterns, EN and ET. So I also think about how can I revisit it for important instructional purposes that aren't boring to the children, but give them opportunities to reread and continue working with the book to develop that fluency. For children who struggle, and this is happening a lot right now, there are a lot of first graders who are in the second half of the year working on long vowels, and they're still struggling with short vowels. And we really have to expose children to grade level content, but it can be overwhelming if there's so many prerequisite skills they haven't learned. So one of the things that I do to support those students, you're working with them during small group on the skills they haven't mastered, but during that small group time, I want to front load some things to get them ready for whole group work so they aren't overwhelmed, they aren't frustrated, they aren't acting out, and they're getting some learning from that. So if we're reading a decodable text that I know is going to be a bit challenging for them, I will have them the previous day listen to a reading of it during independent work time, because most of these decodable texts have recordings of them that you can follow along. And maybe during small group that day before or the morning before, I will guide them through an echo read of at least a portion of the book. I'll read the sentence, they will repeat it, we'll have a conversation. And then by the time they get to the whole group lesson, it will be their third exposure to the book. So it isn't as overwhelming. They're ready to talk about the book. They're ready to write about the book. The reading part is still going to be a bit challenging for them. So when we reread it on subsequent days, rereading the entire story might be too much. I might just have them focus on one page or one paragraph, and that's what I'm going to have them work on, so I can manage my expectations for that new skill, which is a bit beyond where they might be at that time. So you can make those kinds of modifications and expose children to grade level content in a way that is manageable while you're still working on previously taught skills. So by the time you move up that scope of sequence and get to that skill again, they have something to start with. That's the basic concept. Okay, and the last thing, which I'll talk about in like 4 minutes, I swear, is assessment. Assessment, as you know, drives instruction, but I need, for phonics, I need very simple assessments that keep me on top of what my students can and cannot do, and I need very precise assessments, not general, they're here, kind of. I need to know specific skills that they need to work on. So at the beginning of the school year, I have to use a comprehensive assessment tool that looks at all the range of skills, so I know what children know versus what the expectations are. So if I'm teaching second, third, fourth, fifth grade, I need to know if children have some lower level skill holes or deficits in their foundation that I'm going to have to work on rebuilding so that they can progress more quickly in their reading. So all teachers, regardless of what grade they teach, really need a very simple tool, and hopefully you have one. I think most schools do now. If you don't, I can send you mine. It's really basic, but the skills are organized into these 5 categories, because I need to know the lowest level deficit category, so I have a starting point. So imagine I'm assessing a 3rd grader. There are these words with short vowels. Then there are words with short vowels that have blends and digraphs, so that's a little bit harder. There are words with long vowels, words with complex vowels, and then multisyllabic. Let's say I'm teaching a 3rd grader and they do okay with these short vowels and the short vowels with blends and digraphs. Then they start falling apart in the long vowels. That's going to be my starting point. That's a cluster of skills I know they haven't mastered. I'm going to work hard on those and rebuild that foundation. So this is one of the tools that can be super, super helpful. All of the assessments that I give in phonics, it's really important to look at them through 2 lenses, the lens of accuracy and the lens of automaticity, because you need both pieces of information. So if I'm giving an alphabet assessment here, and in kindergarten, I'm having children say the sound for all these letters, I will circle it if it's correct and give a check if it's automatic. So you can have 2 students, you could give this assessment to 2 students and they get all of them correct. But if one student gets lots of checks for accuracy and the other only gets a couple, that tells you next steps. For that one child, they haven't mastered all of those sound spellings. They're not fluent yet. You need to do more targeted work to get them to that point of mastery. So you can really use this knowledge to help you. But the assessment that's helped me the most that I've created are my cumulative assessments. And these are assessments that I give at the end of the week. I can't give them to all students every week. None of the teachers I do can. It would just take too much time. That's not the expectation. These are cumulative. So they look at the week skill, like week 15, and the previously week skills, the previous 5 weeks. So children just read a quick word list. They get a check if it's accurate and a check if it's automatic. So I do a small set of students, in 15 minutes, I can get through maybe 6 to 8 students, just very, very quickly, them reading the word list. And then I look at these assessments over time to stay on top. So what this looks like, imagine Johnny, I tested him on short A. The first time it was week 1. And then the next time I saw him, the short A words were in the middle of the assessment. And the most recent time it was at the end. So I can track progress over time. That's the point of these assessments. If he had lots of checks for accuracy the week we introduced, which I would expect because it's fresh in his memory, but 5 weeks later, some of those checks were disappearing, that means that the learning is starting to decay. So very quickly, I can jump on that skill and do more work so that it doesn't become a learning hole, doesn't become a learning issue. In terms of fluency, reading them at, map, had, rags, he's probably not going to be able to do that week one. So there won't be a lot of checks, at least I don't expect there to be. But if I've done enough review and repetition and rereading of decodables and all those other kinds of things, by the time we get 5 weeks later, I expect check, 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 check for fluency. And if I don't see that, that's another indicator very quickly, I need to do more work with this particular child or group of children. So if there are children who are struggling with certain skills, and I'm noticing that over time, I will, during small group, revisit those lessons and revisit the parts of the lessons that have the most impact that we talked about today, the blending, the dictation, the word building, the reading and writing about decodable text. If I see a lot of students are struggling with a particular skill, maybe we've done our short vowels and there are a lot of children still struggling with short E versus short I. As I look at my lessons in upcoming weeks, I can add more work in the blending lines with short E and short I, or more work in the dictation, or find some additional decodables, or write some decodable sentences for them to practice. I can make those decisions and really give students what they need in real time. Anyway, I went over a little bit. I apologize. This is the checklist I will give you with all the routines, the teacher alerts, and the principal look fors. That was a very, very fast look at some of the high impact routines that I use that have really helped me, and some of the modifications that I've made. These are some of the resources that I use talking about today, like my paper that you can get the ILA website, and some of the books I've written about phonics. Like here again, the decodable textbook, if you want, I'll send you the sample routine and what have you. So that's where we are. And I ran a little bit over, so I'm going to unshare my screen and see if there were any big questions.
Thank you
How
so
are you?
much. That was wonderful. I have a couple of questions in the chat
Sure.
that I'll ask for people busy with kids at home and stuff. So, and then anybody after that, do you have a couple minutes if they jump in with a question they have?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So the first one was back at your the syllable work with, like, was it prevention and that list of words?
Yeah.
Is it mainly words on cards that the kids are manipulating, or do you have the kids write them out first?
For those activities, I actually have the little syllable cards for
Okay.
them to use. It's a much faster activity. Yep.
Okay. And then the second one was, so loving your ideas for how to handle a guided reading group at the small group table with decodable text.
Yeah.
Someone was asking, is it okay to use different decodable text with each student at the table, or should it mostly be all one? What's your opinion or about?
So it sounds like the person asking this does all their phonics in small group. Is that the assumption?
I'm not sure about that. I think they were trying to avoid a lot of kids listening to each other, reading the same book. And so if they have same skill set, but different decodable book companies or different book.
Yeah, you absolutely could if you have access to that many decodables. One of the things that I do during whole group when we're reading decodables, if I have students, for example, who are above level, say, for example, I will have them read that decodable for that week to confirm they really have mastery. But all the rereadings we do on subsequent days is going to be a waste of their time. So when I have children turn to a partner to reread that book on the second day, I give children the book from small group that's more advanced, that we're working on during small group that's further in the scope and sequence. So I do vary the books during that time so that children get exactly what they need.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, she mentioned they do foundations whole group.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I would ask if they have the decodables. I know they have the geodes that you can buy to go with them, because foundations, we use it a lot in New York, and they just have those sentences at the end of the week. It's not enough reading. So I know that they partnered with the geodes to have more reading. And so as long as they have some decodables that work with that, that's wonderful.
Okay, thank you. And that's all the ones in the chat, unless Stephanie, do you want me to ask your question, or do you want to jump in? You go for it.
Okay, I was wondering your thoughts on when you're teaching letter sounds, whether you teach the basic sounds, A says A, B says B, C says K, or whether like using where you're teaching more of the phonograms. So O can say ah, O, or oo, like in on, go, and do. Is that confusing to kids to teach them more of the sounds? Is there a certain grade level where, you know, maybe at kindergarten you'd use the basic sounds, and then maybe at first grade you're teaching the vowels can say long and short? Do you build? Curious your thoughts.
I start out very simply, so it tends to be one letter, one sound, but you do have to introduce the concept very early on, like that vowels have multiple sounds, long and short. Because as you're here again, it goes to conceptual load. For me, I want to start very slowly and then slowly build the conceptual load in a very organized way. So one letter, one sound, then two letters standing for one sound, and then one sound having multiple spellings. So I just get progressively harder and harder. You know, words are, that's the great thing about having conversations with children. If there were more conversations and they're making more observations about words, some of these things will come up before you're introducing them, when children are ready or curious about these things. So if you teach phonics like a system, and you let children know we have these letters by themselves in combination, they stand for different sounds. I'm going to teach you all of these letter sound combinations to access words. It becomes generative for some of our children. They figure out how the system works. They get enough learning under the belt, and they start noticing spellings before you even introduce it. And they'll start asking you these questions. That's where we want them to be. So like that example you gave, O as an on and to and what have you, you're going to have children who start noticing these differences. And you might say, well, we're going to deal with that later, but this is how they sound in these words, you know, to and do and who, and there are a bunch of words that behave that same way. And what do you know, you can have those rich conversations when children are ready for them, even before you formally introduce them.
Thank you. I love how you keep saying like rich conversations, robust conversations, making it about how the language works. That's so powerful, because I think we forget that piece. That's powerful.
And phonics should be fun. It really should be a fun part of the day.
One piggyback question that came in about reading decodable text. Do you ever have kids choral read them?
Yes. So I apologize, I didn't share that in my routine because we were short on time, so I skipped over some of the parts of the lesson. But I make a decision about how they're going to read it the first time through, and then we repeat the reading. So I almost always have children whisper read it the first time through, so that they're all reading, all processing the story, and I'm circulating and listening in. As soon as they finished, we go back from the beginning and we do a choral read. And so they've had one experience, they worked through the words, so it's a bit easier. If I have them do the choral read first and they haven't worked through the words, some children will start struggling, because they're just attacking the words for the first time. I might, if I saw children struggle, or if there are aspects of fluency I want to model, like there are a lot of sentences with different punctuation, so I want to model how to read them, that second read could be an echo read for that purpose, and I can highlight those aspects of fluency. Or I might want to slow it down because too many children struggled with that particular book. So always, for me, a whisper read followed by either a choral or echo in that same lesson.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions they want to jump in quick?
I have a quick question. For those irregularly spelled words, sight words or whatever you want to call them, what do you think about using songs or like little rhymes to help them remember how to spell them? Or do you just solely go by the letters and the sounds? Or can you do some other like trick things to help them?
Oh yeah, if they're mnemonics or something that help them remember, I think that's absolutely wonderful. As long as we also make sure they're thinking about the individual sounds and the spellings of the word, But yeah, those things can be really fun and helpful for some children. I like to have a big bag of tricks.
Thank you.
Wiley, some of us have your kind of your big binder that you wrote from Scholastic.
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still really good though.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's a really inexpensive way for people to try out some blending lines that you have and some activities and things like that. I just wasn't sure if you had any thoughts about the binder or how to use it, or
Yeah,
was it for whole group, small group, or just more
well,
flexible
years
than that?
ago, yeah, years ago when it was created, it was because teachers didn't have any resources to pull out during small group. So if they were working on short A, I just want to give them lots of stuff for short A or short I or what have you. And so that was the original intent.
Okay, yeah, when I read your fresh look at phonics, and all the activities are great, and then I was like, oh, he actually gave us the activities that go with
Many
that
of them,
for
yeah.
a baseline. Yeah, I'll link it in the chat real quick too. Oh, it might take me a minute. I'll send it out in the email to the group about it.
Great.
Well, I want to respect Wiley's time. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. So much good
pleasure.
information and great things we can take back and even try tomorrow. So we
So
really,
let me know. I'll send you the PowerPoint. If there are any resources you want that I talked about, just let me know and I'll send you those as well.
yeah, you might as well just throw in all of those documents because we're
Okay.
like crazy about the stuff. We like all
Okay,
that.
good. My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We
Well, bye everyone. Stay
Bye.
warm. Stay warm and healthy. Yeah.
We'll
Bye.
try.
you. Bye. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah,
you,
absolutely.
Amy.
That was so wonderful.
Shauna, check your chat.
Okay, thanks, Amy. That was awesome.
Thanks,
I'm glad
Amy.
you came.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
It was good to see everybody.